we go again, folks. I, the offrailgamer, present to you episode 51 of our fortnightly podcast, Off the Rails. Yes, we are now just a little over a month away from celebrating our second birthday, and of course, I am planning a bonus episode on 4th of May to mark the event. But that's still a few weeks away yet, so let's focus on the here and now. With that in mind, we have a little admin to cover off first, so please allow me to direct your attention to the podcast episode description, where you'll find links to all my socials, including my email address, where you can write in if you'd like to be included in Listener's Whispers, the part of the show where I read and respond to your messages. As long as they're clean, and not too mean, that is. Although my intended audience are generally folk around the same age as me, I do still try to keep things PG because you really never know who might end up hearing it. As I said, Off the Rails is a fortnightly podcast in which I primarily talk about video games and associated topics. You can find this and every previous episode on Spotify, Castbox, Amazon Music and YouTube. That's all my plugs. I tried to keep it brief for you this week so we can get on with the fun. So how about I go and open up the Retro Marcade and, well, if you wait there a sec, you can have a little listen to this tune. When I think arcade classics, there's one game that will always spring to mind, and honestly, I did consider covering this game in our very first Retro Marcade. Now, you'll be aware that I already looked at Tetris a few weeks ago, but there are plenty of other super heavy hitters that are virtually synonymous with arcade gaming. This is a sequel to a 1980 arcade release and was developed by General Computer Corporation and published by Midway in 1982. The reason I'm looking back at the sequel rather than the original game is because it's this title that I grew up with and is one of the games I talked about in the very first episode of Off the Rails when I spoke of my earliest gaming experiences and my siblings' Sega Master System 2. Well, I shan't keep it secret from you any longer. This week I'm talking Miss Pac-Man. A little bit of history for you. Miss Pac-Man was the first game in the series to not be made by Namco, although they were brought in to provide feedback on the character design, and they collected the same royalties on these new cabinets as they had on the original Pac-Man game. General Computer Corporation, or GCC, originally intended to call their game Crazy Otto, and it went through several name changes before they settled on Miss Pac-Man. It was planned to be an enhancement kit for Pac-Man, but a legal dispute with Atari resulted in GCC being disallowed from selling these without the consent of the original game manufacturer. That, of course, would have been Namco, and though GCC took their idea to Midway, the distributor of Pac-Man in America, they did not have Namco's consent. Well, all's well that ends well, it seems, as we have already seen that Namco did ultimately get their fair share of the profits. Apparently, Pac-Man was the first arcade game that attracted larger numbers of women to play, so before its release, Midway's Stan Cherokee made a statement that Miss Pac-Man was their way of recognising the fact and saying thank you to all those lady arcaders who played and enjoyed Pac-Man. Miss Pac-Man was licensed to and published by Tengen when it was ported to the Sega Master System in 1991, and as I said at the top of this segment, this was my first introduction to the Pac-Man universe, and was indeed one of my earliest introductions to gaming, full stop. Of course, I'm sure you all know the concept. You play as a yellow circle moving around a bright neon-coloured maze, looking to eat all the pills in the level while avoiding being caught by the 4 colourful ghosts haunting your every movement. That is, until you swallow one of the larger pills, often waiting for you in each of the corners of the screen. Swallow one of these bad boys, and I'm not talking about Will Smith and his buddy. Do you know, I've never watched any of the Bad Boys movies. A little bit of off-rail trivia for you there. Swallow one of these bad boys, big enough to make your parents' cod liver oil capsules look no bigger than a single hundreds and thousands, and you'll be able to turn the tables on those ghastly apparitions and gobble them all up. These pills don't regenerate, mind, whereas the ghosts do, so bear that in mind. Eat all the pills in a level to proceed to the next one and progress through the game. In Miss Pac-Man, at least on the Sega Master System port, you could unlock Pac-Man as a second playable character after beating the first few levels, and then you could buddy up and, I assumed, clear each level in half the time thereafter. We only had the one controller when I was small, so I don't actually know how it worked, or even if the game had friendly fire. Inky, Pinky, Blinky and Clyde. I believe those were the names of the ghosts. Though funny now, it made them no less terrifying when I was but a nipper. I mean, I don't think I ever had nightmares about them, but they could be the root cause of my irrational fear of being followed that would later awaken my fight or flight response at the butler following me around Croft Manor in Tomb Raider 2. The fear was real, I can tell you. I'll be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of Miss Pac-Man as a child, but I've grown a much greater fondness for this type of game in recent years, and this is one I do harbour a good amount of nostalgia for, so I'm happy to give time to Miss Pac-Man this week. A very good game indeed. Anyway, I'll lock up here. When I get back, I'll tell you all about the games I've been playing recently. In what I've been playing recently? First up, I want to talk about a new game I picked up. It's one I'd been eyeing up for some time when the price suddenly came down to a figure I couldn't pass up. And by the way, I got my hands on it at the perfect time to ready myself for 8-Bit April. More to come on that in a moment. I picked up Atari Mania, in which you work at the Atari Museum. The game, released in October 2022, is a celebration of 50 years of Atari. The premise kind of reminds me of Wreck-It Ralph, although it's really nothing like that at all, only insofar as the protagonists, and indeed antagonists, of all the arcade cabinets exist in the world and must enter their machines and go to work at the start of each day. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a dark void sucking up everything in the museum, and to challenge it, you'll have to compete in a series of microgames based on the Atari back catalogue. The game box reports over 150 wild micro games, from Asteroids to Yar's Revenge. The game is not easy, and even had my palms sweating from the off, but as a self-professed Atari enthusiast, I'm really appreciating this title so far. So look out for Atari Mania on the channel at some point. I think it'll deserve a stream this April. Talking of April, last year we celebrated Atari April, and while I fully intended to bring it back, I decided to show some love to a bit more of that era of gaming. Only 8 bits more, that is, as this year I'll be posting daily content on YouTube and TikTok, briefly showcasing a carefully picked list of games from the Atari 2600 or 7800 library and from the Sega Master System. These will primarily be a series of short videos with a little bit of trivia accompanying the gameplay on screen. Maybe next year we'll have a look at Nintendo's offerings on the NES and Game Boy. Off-channel, I finished my playthrough of The Godfather on PS2 and am now considering giving the Xbox 360's Godfather 2 a second chance. I absolutely loved revisiting post-war New York and taking care of business for the Corleone family. I think I got as much out of it this playthrough as I did when I was a kid. I really do think the game has aged very, very well. Rolling back just a little bit, I mentioned Game Boy just now. Well, I picked up my analog pocket again and started playing a Game Boy game I'd never come across before. Mario and Yoshi plays a little bit like a Game & Watch gallery game. You play as Mario hopping about the bottom of the screen, catching characters falling, and then swapping their places around to pair them off, one atop the other, not side by side, to clear them and prevent stacking to the top of the screen. It's a little bit like a sort of Tetris or Dr. Mario style puzzle game, which just about manages to do its own thing. I'd say it's just as fun too, as I whiled away the better part of a whole evening after work one day with this one. If I can get my capture card to work with my analog docking station, I'll certainly try and get some gameplay up on the channel at some point. I want to talk about something different now. Shall we have a whisper from a listener? Hi offrailgamer, I've just recently found your podcast and have only had a chance to listen to the last few so far. I'm looking forward to listening to the others soon. I sold my PS2 collection a long time ago and have been looking at collecting again, but was shocked at the price of some of the games I used to own. I was wondering what your thoughts are. Am I looking in the wrong places, or is there a better way of playing older games? I understand you can access a classics library with PlayStation Plus and was thinking of trying to pick up a cheap second-hand PS4. Anyway, loving the show, Jack. And that was from New Organaut, Jack in South Shields. Welcome aboard. I will say I'm not exactly an expert, but there are a few options I can lay out for you in response to your questions. Retro game collecting isn't the cheapest hobby, and there are some games that you really will be paying hundreds of pounds for. Saying that, it's always worth scouring eBay, as you will sometimes find auctions that have been overlooked, so you can find the occasional amazing deal. Of course, you can't always guarantee the condition, but on the whole, I've tended to have good experiences. I can't speak from personal experience, but I know some people have also found some absolute steals in charity shops and at cart boost sales. You'll probably see a lot of Call of Duty and FIFA, but you just might find a hidden gem here and there. The Classics library with PS Plus is fairly extensive, but covers PS1, PS2 and PSP games. You may not necessarily find all the games you want to revisit. Don't know if you can find the full list of titles online, but I'd probably advise a Google search before buying a console. Of course, this would also give you access to some amazing, more recent games like God of War and Red Dead Redemption 2, if you were looking to get back into gaming generally. And finally, there is the option of emulation. Now, personally, I prefer physical collecting, but I will say when it comes to older games, anything you buy is putting money in the pockets of private collectors rather than the teams that actually developed them. So I personally don't see anything unethical in emulating older games. Certainly no more so than driving up prices as much as they have been for some games. Anyway, I hope that helps, at least a little. Thank you for listening, and thank you for writing in. And of course, if you're listening at home thinking you'd like to feature in the next Listener's Whispers, please do drop an email to offrailgamer@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, as long as you keep it clean and aren't too mean. With that said, I think it's time we got on to the main part of the show. I've talked about it a bit in recent weeks, primarily because I've been playing, and have only just finished. Beware spoilers for this 19-year-old game, because today I want to get into The Godfather, but first, a little of my history with the title. In my teens, I was totally engrossed by gangsters, primarily admiring the sharp suits, but also that take-no-nonsense attitude that gets presented in film and television. I absolutely loved the film Goodfellas, and as I approached my 16th birthday, I decided I must watch The Godfather next. My parents were keen for me to read more, and suggested I read the Mario Puzo novel first, and then watch the film. So I did. I devoured that book like none other I'd sat down with before. Well, except for To Kill a Mockingbird, but that's literally a different story. As if by fate, almost as soon as I'd finished reading the book, I saw the Godfather video game being advertised for the PS2. And I had a birthday coming up as well. I absolutely loved playing this game all through the summer. I'd just finished my GCSEs, and although I picked up a part-time job working for a supermarket, I still had plenty of time in that 8 weeks or so to play my new game. You pretty much play through the narrative of the book and the film, only you create a new original character, and like any Bernard Cornwell book, it was really you behind all the events, rather than those we had previously known to be responsible. What that means, of course, is that you're thrown into the action and get to be the hero of the Corleone family. The game opens on an unfamiliar scene as an unrecognized member of the Corleone family gets gunned down in the street while his young son looks on in horror. You will play as that boy, but once he's grown into a man. You enter a customization screen in which you can choose what your character looks like, what clothes they wear, though options are limited until you start earning, and you can name them. Early on, you meet Luca Brasi. I mean, it'd have to be early on, I suppose. If you know, you know. Luca takes you under his wing for some tutorial missions, teaching you the basics of fighting hand-to-hand, getting in and out of cover, and using firearms. It's all over pretty quick, and you'll be exploring New York City before you know it. You come up with your buddy Monk. He's not in the book or the film, but we'll come back to him later. I mention it now because this is one of the few divergences from the original material. One of the first missions sees Don Vito shot down in the street. Thankfully, you were around to help, so his life wasn't dependent on just his middle son, Freddy. You rush Don Corleone to the hospital, and Freddy makes himself more useful than in the book, leaning out of the car window to shoot back at the rival gang cars that are trying to make sure the Don doesn't get to receive medical treatment. Later, you return to the hospital to check on the Don. You find his youngest son, Michael, sat on the steps. The men that had been guarding the entrance have been moved on by the police. It turns out Police Chief McCluskey has been paid off by one of the other families. I'll explain this in a moment. To make sure the area is clear for them to make a hit on Vito Corleone while he's laid up in his hospital bed. Right, we'd best make a quick aside here to explain the whole five families thing. You see, in Mario Puzo's The Godfather, New York City is divided up between 5 crime families, or criminal organizations. There's the Corleones, they're our guys. Then there's the Tattaglias, the Strachis, the Cuneos, and the Barzinis. They're all trying to run their own criminal enterprises and build their empires, and as a result, they keep stepping on one another's toes. So basically, one of the other families tried to kill Vito Corleone in the street, but he survived the trip to the hospital. Now they paid off the police to remove the Corleone men guarding the hospital so they can have another go at taking him out. Luckily, you and Michael are there to thwart the plan. Although, when McCluskey returns, he breaks Michael's jaw with his flashlight. Tom Hagen, the Don's adopted son and consigliere, or counsel to you and I, arrives and threatens legal action. McCluskey backs off and the guards are reinstated to their posts until Vito is fit enough to return home. And when he does, he learns of the death of the big man, Luca Brasi. Luca was lured into a negotiation with a man called Salozzo, at which his hands are pinned to the bar and his demise is issued courtesy of a garrote wire. You might feel bad given that he was your mentor at the start of the game, but if you read the book, you'll learn what a truly awful human Luca Brasi was, and you won't mourn him any longer. That's not a spoiler I'm prepared to give though, as we are sticking to talking about the game as much as possible, not the book. Anyway, it's suspected that Paulie Gatto, one of the Corleone caporegimes, or captains, was involved in the attempted hit on Don Corleone, so you take a ride with him and Clemenza out to the middle of nowhere. Clemenza says he needs to take a leak, and has Paulie pull over to the side of the road. From memory, I think he's killed in the car in the book and the film, but to give you something more to do in the game, you have to chase him into a construction site, ducking his shots and catching him with your return fire until he is dead. You pretty much play through the events of the book and the film, but there are some extras just for the game. For example, one where you go to attend a New Year's Eve party in an apartment over a florist's, only the police have cordoned off the street and won't let you in. You have to sneak round the back down an alley. Along the way, I think you have to bribe one police officer and silently dispatch another, through strangulation. In the party, a corrupt police captain starts trying to throw his weight around, threatening some of the goyles and partygoers. You follow him up to the roof and throw him off the edge. Surely it would look like murder. All except you throw a bottle of booze after him, which smashes in the alleyway, perfectly disguising the captain's fall as a drink-related accident. There's also the whole best friend Monk part of the game. Monk is not in the book or the film either, but you work a few missions with him, and even move in with his sister Frankie. Poor Frankie meets her untimely demise when she's kidnapped, I think by Barzini's men. You and Monk get tipped off as to where they may have taken her, and race to the church in Midtown, or Hell's Kitchen. Gosh, I've only just played this, and I'm already fuzzy on the details. That's what happens when you get old, I guess. You get there too late. Frankie's been shot and dies in her brother's arms. Monk, as you can imagine, is distraught, but he won't be for long. You get tipped off that the rat who's been betraying the family is holed up in a hotel guarded by Barzini's men. You go in guns blazing, but when you reach the room in question, you find an FBI agent who tells you that his informant is none other than our bestie, Monk. Needless to say, your next move is to whack him. Otherwise, you pretty much follow the story quite closely. You get to play out the famous scene sneaking the horse's head into the bed of the film director. You hide the gun behind the toilet cistern for Michael to use to kill McCluskey and Solozzo in the restaurant in Hell's Kitchen. You're there to report back after Sonny gets whacked at the toll gate on the route towards New Jersey. And you get to exact revenge on everyone who's wronged the Corleones over the course of the game. Now I want to turn away from the story and look at some of the mechanics before we wrap things up, because these are really what makes the game so special. First off, I want to look at the hand-to-hand combat because, as I think I said in the last podcast, I feel like these really are up there with Red Dead Redemption 2. You can brawl, throwing punches, and even lashing out with kicks and stomps when your opponent's down, but you can also grab people as well, to strike them at close enough range that they can do little to retaliate until they break your hold on them. From this position, you can put your hands around their neck and throttle the literal life out of them, and let me tell you, it's not like when they do it on The Simpsons. Alternatively, you can just manhandle them, slamming their back up against the wall or putting their head through a window. This is a good trick for extorting protection money out of business owners because they both feel it and it causes damage to their property. If these tactics don't work when you're trying to take over a bakery, you can always toss them in their ovens and come back later to try and make a deal with the new owner. And that's the last mechanic I want to talk about, is hostile takeovers. You see, throughout the game, you take opportunities to grab power and grow the Corleone family's presence in New York. You do this by extorting and buying out businesses owned by rival families. You'll even attack their warehouses to take control of their supply chains. Ultimately, you'll attack their compounds, the gated houses where the heads of the families live. These are always 2 houses, and you must place a bomb in each basement to secure them for yourself, after which you can use them as a personal safe house. Once you've completed the main storyline, you need to take ownership of all the businesses, rackets, warehouses and compounds to finally earn your title of Don of New York City. The Godfather is an incredible game that honestly still holds up today. I certainly had a lot of fun revisiting it. But sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. I will of course be back in 2 weeks' time with the next Off the Rails, and you can keep an eye out for my 8-Bit April TikToks and YouTube shorts. If you liked this show, please do share it around and drop a rating. No obligations, of course. Otherwise, until we meet again, bye!